Hi, my name is Daniel Kitts. I'm with TVU.org, and I'm here to talk with Sarah Kaplan, Professor of Strategic Management at the Rotman School of Management, about the closure of Goodwill Toronto's 16 stores. If you haven't heard, Goodwill Toronto, which sells donated clothing for charitable causes, announced that it was closing the 16 stores it runs. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today about this.
My pleasure.
So I guess my first question, which I think is the question a lot of people have, is should we be surprised that a place that gets its merchandise basically for free would have to close down 16 stores?
Right. Well, I think we should first think about what the whole business model of the Goodwill is. And of course, they get some of their merchandise for free through the donations that people make of clothing as well as other goods. On the other hand, those show up in various states of disrepair and things like that. And there's actually quite a bit of work that goes into actually getting the goods into a shape where they can actually be sold. So it's for free, but there's a lot of work that goes into then getting the merchandise, to be presentable. But it is true, they're not paying for the original merchandise itself. On the other hand, if you think about the Goodwill, those goods that they get to sell are aimed at just generating revenues that allow them to perform their actual services. So Goodwill only has stores so that they can afford to provide the services that the Goodwill has always provided, like job training and things like that. So that's where their expenses are going. Some of the expenses are in making the merchandise useful for sale, but most of their expenses are in actually delivering their mission.
Now, the CEO announcing the closures stated a really tough retail environment is one of the reasons why they had to close. Obviously, you're not, privy to Goodwill's business strategy or its costs, but how plausible is it that the retail environment is so tough out there that even a social enterprise like Goodwill can't afford to operate?
Well, I think part of the story may be that the retail environment is tougher in some ways. If we think about the alternative for people who buy things at Goodwill would be to go to a discount store such as a Walmart, such as Dollarama, or one of the other dollar stores. And as that market is becoming more and more competitive, we could imagine that people would not need to shop at Goodwill. If they can get a t-shirt for $5 at Walmart, then they may not need to go to Goodwill to get a used t-shirt for $5 at Goodwill. So it could be that some of the competitiveness in the low end of the discount market could be driving some customers away who want to purchase new goods. I think that story only goes so far in the sense that if you look at the Goodwills in other areas of Ontario, not the 16 Toronto stores that you just mentioned, those stores are doing fine and those Goodwills are doing fine. So I think we may need to look a little bit more deeply into the problem. It could be that the retail environment is part of the problem, but if you look on Yelp, as I did today, at reviews of Goodwill stores, it doesn't seem like the reviews were particularly negative. And so I feel like that may be part of the story, but we also see that, for example, the entire board also resigned last Friday just before the announcements. It leads me to wonder, although of course none of us have any data or information on this, if there couldn't be some other management issues that led to the Goodwill in the Toronto area to be running a deficit.
So given all that, given that there is a more competitive discount retail environment out there, but at the same time it seems like other Goodwill chains are doing relatively well, what should other social enterprises, places that basically try to make money not for to pump into profits, but to pump into good causes basically, what should they take from this episode? Should they be concerned about the environment for them, or is it possible this is sort of a more isolated case?
I feel, at least today, that this is more of an isolated case. I think the message that any social enterprise should take away from this is that you have to be well managed. And being a social enterprise is not an excuse to not be well managed. That you need the same skills, the same capabilities, and maybe even more skills and more capabilities than in the for-profit world. And this is a challenge, because in the nonprofit world, often you do see cases where there isn't the strongest management, in part because it attracts people who really want to do what's socially right. And that's great, but doing what's socially right may not also contribute to the kind of discipline that you really need to run any kind of business, whether it's a social enterprise or a for-profit enterprise. So I think any social enterprise, what they should take away from this is you still need to be extremely well managed. And if you still have to have income, whether it's through donations or of goods or donations of money or grants from the government that exceeds the costs that you incur to deliver whatever services you're delivering. You can't run at a deficit. No business, no social enterprise can run at a deficit. You need to make that up somewhere. And so you have to create the value and then manage in a cost-effective way. So that message certainly transmits to any social enterprise. But I wouldn't say that the fact that Goodwill is struggling right now is a message to all social enterprises that they're going to struggle. This feels to me like a one-off situation with a particularly difficult management context in which the board has now resigned. They closed their doors with no warning at all. According to their union contract, they're supposed to give their employees 30 to 60 days notice. So the fact that they've taken this extraordinarily drastic measure leads me to believe that the quote, difficult retail environment is not the whole story, and therefore not the whole story for other social enterprises.
Well, very interesting. I'd really like to thank you, Sarah Kaplan, a professor of strategic management at the Rotman School of Management, for taking the time to talk to us about this today.
My pleasure. Always happy to chat.